The first frost of November had settled over Haddon, Maine like a thin veil, transforming the Northbridge Conservatory of Music's Gothic spires into glistening sentinels against the darkening sky. November in this part of New England always carried a certain weight, a heaviness that clung to the shoulders of everyone who walked the prestigious halls of the conservatory. But on November 12, 2015, that weight would become unbearable. Clara Whitman's fingers danced across the strings of her violin with a precision that made even the most seasoned professors pause in the hallways. At 22, she possessed the kind of talent that appeared once in a generation, raw, intuitive, yet disciplined. The 1745 Italian violin she played was practically an extension of her own body, responding to her touch as if it had been crafted specifically for her hands 2 centuries before she was born. "You're rushing the Paganini," Professor Yates said, his voice cutting through the final notes of her practice. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the rehearsal room as he paced behind her. Again. From the Allegro. Clara's shoulder tensed imperceptibly beneath her cardigan. She nodded once, straightened her posture, and began again. The notes flew from her violin, each one perfect, deliberate, defiant. Megan Bailey, another violin student who had been waiting outside for her own lesson, watched through the door's narrow window. She would later tell police that Professor Yates stood uncomfortably close to Clara, his hand occasionally brushing against her shoulder to correct her posture. "It wasn't the first time I'd seen him do that," Megan would testify. But that day, Clara seemed different. More rigid. Like she was trying not to flinch. At 4:32 p.m., Clara packed away her violin with methodical precision. The instrument disappeared into its burgundy velvet-lined case, which she then secured with 2 brass latches that clicked with a finality that would later seem prophetic. "You're prepared for tonight?" Professor Yates asked, gathering his sheet music. The annual fall showcase was that evening, Clara's final performance before embarking on her first European tour. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice soft but firm. Those who knew her well would have recognized the undercurrent of tension. "Professor, about what we discussed last week. We can talk after your performance," he cut her off, glancing at his watch. "I have another student waiting." Megan Bailey watched as Clara's expression hardened momentarily before she nodded and left the room. Later, she would describe Clara as looking like someone who had made a decision she couldn't back out of. At 4:40 p.m., security cameras captured Clara exiting the practice hall, her violin case clutched against her chest like a shield. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, her face partially obscured by the high collar of her coat. She walked briskly, with purpose, toward the staff parking lot at the rear of the main building. By 5 p.m., Clara Whitman had vanished. The first sign that something was wrong came when Clara failed to appear for her pre-performance warm-up. Lily Chen, her roommate and fellow violinist, texted her at 6:15 p.m., "Where are you? Backstage is chaos and Yates is looking for you." The text went unanswered. By 7 p.m., when Clara was scheduled to perform Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, the backstage area was buzzing with concerned whispers. Professor Yates stood by the stage entrance, repeatedly checking his phone. "I assumed she had stage fright," he later told Detective Marcus Reed of the Haddon Police Department. It wouldn't be the first time a promising student cracked under pressure. But those who knew Clara dismissed this explanation immediately. Clara didn't get nervous, Lily Chen insisted during her interview. She lived for performance. Something happened to her. Someone happened to her. After the concert concluded without Clara's appearance, Dean Eleanor Prescott placed the first call to the police. By midnight, Clara's face was plastered across the campus, local news stations had picked up the story, and Detective Reed was standing in the middle of her untouched dorm room, taking inventory. "Everything's here," he noted, gesturing to Clara's suitcase still tucked neatly under her bed. Passport in the top drawer. Concert dress hanging in the closet. Laptop on the desk. The only thing missing is her violin. Lily finished for him, hugging herself tightly as she stood in the doorway. She would never leave without it. That instrument was worth more than everything else in this room combined. The investigation moved quickly at first, fueled by the high-profile nature of the case. Clara wasn't just any missing student, she was already being hailed as the next great American virtuoso, with appearances on NPR and regional television. Her disappearance made national headlines within days. Devin Hirsch was the first person of interest. Clara's ex-boyfriend and fellow violinist had a clear motive. 3 weeks before her disappearance, Clara had discovered he had forged her signature on a competition entry, submitting her original composition as his own. When confronted, Devin had begged her to keep quiet. He said his career would be over if anyone found out, Clara had told Lily. But I couldn't let it go. Music is sacred, you don't steal someone else's voice. Clara reported Devin to Dean Prescott, resulting in his immediate dismissal from the conservatory. Witnesses reported seeing him cleaning out his dorm room in tears, telling anyone who would listen that Clara ruined everything. When questioned by Detective Reed, Devin's eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. I was teaching a private lesson across town when Clara disappeared, he said, his voice cracking. Check with the Ramsey family, I was with their daughter from 4 to 5:30. His alibi checked out. The Ramseys confirmed his presence at their home during the critical time window, and security footage from their neighborhood showed his car arriving and leaving at the stated times. I loved her, Devin told Reed during a follow-up interview, tears streaming down his face. Even after everything, I loved her. I would never hurt Clara. With Devin's alibi confirmed, attention shifted to Professor Richard Yates, Clara's private instructor and mentor for the past 3 years. Lily Chen and 3 other students came forward with uncomfortable stories about Yates' teaching methods, particularly with his female students. He would insist on late-night private sessions, one student reported anonymously. He said true artistry happened in darkness, when all distractions were removed. Another claimed that Yates had offered great improvements in exchange for private meetings off campus. When she refused, her performance evaluations plummeted inexplicably. Most damning was the revelation that Clara had requested a transfer out of Yates' mentorship just days before her disappearance. Dean Prescott confirmed receiving Clara's email but said the request hadn't been processed yet. She didn't say why she wanted to change instructors, Prescott explained. Just that she felt she needed fresh perspective before her European tour. When confronted with these allegations, Yates became defensive. I push my students because mediocrity is a disease in our profession, he said coldly. Clara understood that. She was special precisely because she could handle criticism that would break lesser talents. He denied seeing Clara outside of their scheduled 4 p.m. lesson on the day she vanished. She left my studio around 4:30. I had another student after her. That's the last I saw of her. But the investigation took a dramatic turn when Mrs. Elaine Yates, the professor's wife of 15 years, came forward with troubling information. In a private interview with Detective Reed, she revealed that her husband had returned home unusually late on November 12. Richard always comes home by 6:30 on showcase nights to change clothes before returning for the evening performance, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, he didn't come home until nearly 9 o'clock, and he went straight to the backyard. When Reed pressed for details, Mrs. Yates hesitated before continuing. He burned something in our fire pit. Clothing, I think. When I asked about it, he said he'd spilled chemicals on them in the photography darkroom at school. But Richard doesn't teach photography. He never has. A search of the Yates residence revealed traces of ash in the backyard fire pit, but forensic analysis proved inconclusive. No human remains were detected, but fibers consistent with wool clothing were identified among the ashes. Despite the suspicious circumstances, there wasn't enough evidence to file charges against Professor Yates. He continued teaching at the conservatory, though enrollment in his classes noticeably declined. As weeks turned to months, Clara's case gradually faded from the headlines. Her parents, retired music teachers from Vermont, made monthly trips to Haddon, distributing flyers and meeting with Detective Reed, who by then had compiled a 3-inch binder full of leads that went nowhere. The case grew cold. Then, in the summer of 2018, nearly 3 years after Clara's disappearance, renovation began on Northbridge's oldest building, Wellington Hall, named after the conservatory's founder. The building had been closed for structural repairs, and workers were examining the foundation when they discovered something unusual in a disused soundproof practice room in the basement. The dimensions were off, explained Mike Donnelly, the head of the construction crew. The room was about 3 feet shorter than it should have been according to the blueprints. So we started knocking. Behind a false wall, hastily constructed but carefully concealed, they found Clara's violin case. Inside was not the priceless instrument, but rather a pair of partially decomposed concert shoes, the same style Clara had been known to wear for performances. Beside the case lay the broken strap of her distinctive shoulder bag, a custom-made leather piece that her parents had given her for her 21st birthday. Forensic testing confirmed the shoes were Clara's size, and DNA on the bag matched both Clara and an unknown male contributor. The violin itself was nowhere to be found. The discovery reignited national interest in the case. Crime podcasts devoted episodes to the mystery of Clara Whitman, and amateur sleuths combed through every publicly available detail. The pressure forced the Haddon Police Department to reopen the investigation, with Detective Reed now joined by 2 FBI agents specializing in cold cases. 2 weeks after the discovery, an anonymous tip came in from a man identifying himself only as a former maintenance worker at the conservatory. He refused to meet in person but agreed to a phone interview with Reed. "I was asked to help seal off a maintenance space around the time that girl went missing," the man said, his voice disguised through an electronic filter. "I was told it was for soundproofing, which made sense in that building. But when I got there, I noticed a red stain on the concrete floor." The man claimed that Professor Yates had offered him $5,000 in cash to complete the work quickly and "forget what you saw." Frightened by the implications, the worker took the money but left the job unfinished, calling in sick the next day and quitting the following week. "I've been carrying this for 3 years," the caller said. "I should have come forward sooner, but I was scared. I have a family." Attempts to trace the call failed, and the worker never contacted authorities again. When confronted with this new information, Professor Yates immediately retained a lawyer and refused to answer further questions. Within a month, he had submitted his resignation to the conservatory and moved out of state, citing personal reasons and health concerns. Devin Hirsch, who had transferred to a music program in California after his dismissal, also cut all ties with Northbridge. His social media accounts were deleted, and he stopped performing publicly. Attempts to locate him for additional questioning proved unsuccessful, though records indicated he had legally changed his name in 2017. The case remained officially open, but progress stalled once again. Clara's parents established a scholarship in her name at the conservatory, ensuring that at least her legacy would endure where she could not. To this day, at every annual fall showcase at the Northbridge Conservatory, a single chair remains empty on stage. A violin bow rests silently across the seat, a reminder of the talented young woman who walked into the cold November evening and vanished without a trace. In the years since her disappearance, students at Northbridge claim to hear violin music late at night from the basement of Wellington Hall, haunting fragments of the Tchaikovsky concerto that Clara never performed. Campus security has investigated these reports multiple times but found nothing. Detective Reed, now retired but still haunted by the case, visits the conservatory each November 12th. He sits alone in the auditorium, staring at the empty chair on stage, turning the same questions over in his mind. Who was the unknown male whose DNA was found on Clara's bag? Why was her violin, worth nearly $500,000, never recovered? And perhaps most disturbing of all, if the false wall contained only Clara's belongings, then where was Clara herself? Somewhere, perhaps, a 1745 Italian violin still produces the extraordinary sound that once earned Clara Whitman standing ovations. And somewhere, the truth about what happened in those missing 20 minutes between 4:40 and 5 p.m. on November 12, 2015, remains hidden, a perfect mystery composed of unanswered questions and haunting silence.